All right. Just some general guidelines on feeding. First of all, it's good to feed familiar feeds. If you know the cattle have seen certain types of feed before, it's good to feed them something that they're going to know what it is. And then the other thing is quality matters, and we'll talk a little bit about quality here in a minute with regard to alfalfa hay. But when cattle first come on feed, they don't eat very much. When they're learning how to, in many cases, learning how to stick their head through a feed bunk or through a hay feeder, or whatever it might be. If they've never done that before, that's a foreign thing to them. So figuring out how to eat, we need to make it really easy, but we need to make every bite count when they're not eating very much feed. We want to start them a starter hay to be fairly familiar and palatable. So clean, high quality grass hay may be preferred to alfalfa if it's more familiar. Now, high quality grass hay is not as nutrient dense as alfalfa is. That kind of is a little bit in conflict with what I just said a second ago. But if they're not used to eating alfalfa, if they've never eaten it, then they do recognize the grass, then you're better off getting a higher volume of feed into them. So just kind of watch that. And I also don't like to feed silages in a starter diet. If you're in a situation where you can feed silage, oftentimes the smell of silage is very different, and it's not something you want to start them on. I like to feed a free choice palatable mineral in the pen. This would be a loose mineral. There are several companies that make kind of a high stress mineral, whatever it might be. You can make it available to those calves for the first, say, 3 weeks. Let them eat that. They get their vitamins and trace minerals. Oftentimes, they'll eat a good palatable mineral when they maybe won't stick their head in a feed bunk because they'll want the salt content, and you can get them to eat a little bit of mineral. Anything we can get into them early on, especially if it's those vitamins and trace minerals, can be helpful. You just leave it in the pen for a few weeks. After you get the cattle up on feed good, you can pull it out of the pen and not continue to need to feed that. And then as we introduce new feeds, you can do that after 2 or 3 days when the cattle get acclimated to putting their head in a bunk and starting to eat. Then you can introduce some sort of mixed ration or pelleted feed or whatever you might be feeding. Just top dress it lightly on top of the hay that they're eating, and they'll start to pick it up with the hay. So some health concerns with weaning. First of all, there's really just two that are major concerns. One's coccidiosis, which would show up as a bloody scours. And really all rations you feed should be supplemented with some sort of or the supplement should contain some sort of coccidiostat. Several of them out on the market. You've got Decox, Bovatec, Rumensin, and then Amprolium or Corid. All of those can be effective coccidiostat. They really have somewhat different roles. Bovatec and Rumensin also improve feed efficiency and gain as well, whereas Decox and Amprolium really are just specifically for coccidiosis. The nice thing about Amprolium is you can put it both in the feed or the water, and so that can be a good way to get it in the feed, but you really just want to address coccidiosis before it starts. So be on top of that, and that's something to discuss with your nutritionist or feed company rep or whoever it is that's helping you get the right feeds put together. They're likely going to bring it up as well, but just be aware that definitely does make a difference. The other piece is your respiratory disease. And I think the first point is that good weaning and nutrition and vaccination program is the best preventive. The more you can do on a front end, the more those cattle are going to be prepared to handle the stresses of weaning and learning a new feed. Other prevention options are, we talked a little bit earlier about a prophylactic antibiotic treatment, but make sure you're talking to your vet about that. And what I mean by that is treat every animal when you're at initial processing. You can also utilize feed grade antibiotics, such as, an example would be CTC. There's others that can be fed for a period of time. In some cases, you can do both. You can utilize an injectable on the front end, and then use feed grade antibiotics later in the feeding period, say day 10 or 20 or down the road. And I think the important thing to remember about feed-grade antibiotics is that they are a better prevention than they are a treatment. Once cattle are sick, I'm not a big believer in feed-grade antibiotics making that big of a difference, but I have seen it make a difference on the front end, and really it may be involved in help with the from a digestion standpoint as much as it is help with respiratory problems. But obviously, digestive issues end up rolling into a respiratory problem with cattle inevitably. So anyway, these are some things to talk to your vet about and that you have to think about. The other thing is to set up a treatment protocol ahead of time, again, in consultation with your vet. So when an animal gets sick, gets a respiratory issue, which antibiotic are you going to use first? Which one are you going to use second? Say in a second treatment or a third. And set this up ahead of time and then stick with it. Stick with it long enough to see what's working and what's not working. Many times folks want to skip around and use this drug and use that drug. And at the end of the day, they really have no idea what's working and what's not working. And so stick with the protocol. Work it out with your vet and stick with it. You're going to want to maintain some records, record the treatments, know which calf number, what product they used, the date. You can oftentimes, if you don't have IDs on your calves, you can just ID the cattle you treat. Put a number in it, the product and the date. That way you will know as you're looking at the cattle later, especially if you have more than just a few. When you're looking at them later, you'll know, hey, I treated that animal on the 23rd of October or whatever it might be. So you'll know how long it's been since their last treatment and know how long you should give them before you should look at treating them again, especially if you're using a long-acting antibiotic. Excuse me. Okay, I went backwards here. Sorry about that. The last thing I had there was to stay on label. Stay on label with your with the antibiotics. Use them as they are prescribed to be used and under the direction of your vet. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about the next phase in terms of feeding programs and that kind of thing. And the first thing I'd tell you is get the right help. So I like this picture. This young lady, if you've got a branding, you better invite her. She can help you do anything you need to have done, and she can especially help you get calf fries to be thrown on the fire because she's dang good at that. So to start off with, know what you're feeding. You're going to want to get some forage analysis. And I would say get some analysis on every different type of forage you're feeding. And if you've got forages from different locations, let's say you're feeding some three-way small grains hay, whatever it might be, but you've got it from different fields or bought it from different buyers, you're going to want to do more than one analysis because they're not going to be all the same. But your basal part of your diet, which is going to be your forage, make sure you analyze it. See what you're starting with. Next would be water. Mentioned that earlier. You don't need to test your water all the time unless you're changing water sources, but you're going to want to test your water to know if you've got some mineral issues that are going to be causing problems for you, whether it's in terms of water intake or going to be an antagonist for some trace minerals, so you can figure out how to mitigate those issues. Again, doesn't need to be done all the time, but it needs to be done often enough, maybe every few years, just to know what you have, as long as you're not changing water sources. And then the other one is to utilize your local expertise. I know we've got expertise there at the county extension office. You've also got your feed company representatives, which folks are usually quite knowledgeable, and then a nutritionist, whether they work for a feed company or some other form of nutritional help. You're going to want to make sure you're checking back with them and getting a good, balanced diet put together. So there's really too many scenarios for me to go into everybody's possible scenarios. So I've broken them down in just really three very simple scenarios in terms of what you might want to look for. But I didn't attempt today to actually balance any rations for you because it's going to be so location specific. But we'll first start off with some sort of a grass or small grains like a triticale hay, which I think is pretty common. Most of the time, that's going to be you're going to need to add some additional protein and energy to this type of a feed, if you're just going to feed hay and say some kind of supplement, you can buy a bagged, pelleted, or meal supplement that will compensate with some energy and protein. There, I'm sure that commercial manufacturers have this type of thing available. You're going to want to make sure that they're fortified with all of your macro and trace minerals and vitamins. And then again, we talked about the potential medication for coccidiosis control and improved feed efficiency. So I would definitely use Rumensin and Bovitec, or Bovitec in terms from a feed efficiency standpoint. Both can have some effect on coccidiosis. Rumensin tends to be a little stronger with coccidiosis, so oftentimes if you want to feed Bovitec, you can feed Decox with that. But make sure you address the issue of coccidiosis on the front end, and also get the advantage of the improved feed efficiency by feeding these products. And then the other thing you can look at is some sort of a commodity mix. I know there's some feed companies that feed, or that can provide kind of a mix of DDG and corn. That's a nice mix of energy and protein. And I believe that mix is probably more predominantly corn, which is what you need more of in this case, is more energy, just a little bit of protein. And I'm sure you can get that with a fortified mineral mix mixed in, or maybe you feed that separately. But again, think about the medication portion of that to improve feed efficiency and protect against coccidiosis. And the other, which might be quite common, is if you're going to use alfalfa hay as your basal forage supplement. And certainly good alfalfa hay can be both a protein and energy supplement. So in a lot of cases, if you're feeding alfalfa, you don't need a lot of extra protein. And so you could potentially feed just a grain mix, or maybe a DDG corn mix with that as well. And then once again, let's make sure we're fortified with minerals that will balance alfalfa specifically, and medicated as we talked about above there. One note, I think folks with alfalfa hay, when we want to buy the very best of the best. And I can tell you, if you've got good, clean, not real dusty, no mold, stuff like that, but just good, clean, feeder quality alfalfa, that may be better than looking at really super high quality alfalfa in terms of avoiding bloat. And then also cattle can get really loose on high quality alfalfa. You got the high protein and mineral content of alfalfa can cause some problems here that may add more digestive stress than it's worth in terms of having a super high quality hay. So again, I'm not talking about buying junky alfalfa, but just good clean hay. But having the real high test alfalfa is probably not necessary. It may require you to be a little careful on how you feed it. Okay, and then there's always a total mixed ration. Again, there's a myriad of ways to putting this together, so I'm not going to try to really put a ration together per se, but you've got your basal forage content of your diet, which can be some ground hay or straw mixed with silage, be it corn silage, triticale silage, alfalfa, whatever it might be, is going to be your basic forage piece. Make sure it's analyzed, as we mentioned earlier. And then you're going to add some sort of a commodity with grains, corn, rolled barley, or wheat, whatever it might be to add energy to the diet. Likely going to need a little bit added protein. Could be a DDG, a soy meal, canola meal, whatever it might be. Again, work with your nutritionist on this one. And then you may need some sort of a mineral balancer. A lot of times you can buy a bagged mineral balancer that will contain Rumensin or Bovitec or Decox or whatever it might be. And so, your ration will look kind of like this. You're going to mix it all together in your truck, and you'll end up having cattle eat out of a bunk that looks like that. A lot of y'all are already doing this, of course.